Hey, I'm Denis, welcome to my channel DMaker. Today's video is the second part of the Do-It-Yourself table saw series. In the last video I made the lifting system and the enclosure of the motor, and in this part I will be showing you how to make the tilting system and the cabinet for the saw. Let's get into it! The first thing to do is the tilting system, and for that I will use a double trunnion made with 21mm Baltic birch plywood. The first two pieces are the ones attached to the saw enclosure, and to make the trunnions the more accurate as possible, I try to do all the steps in both sides at the same time. After drilling the center holes, I use my router jig to make circles with a calculated radius, so that the saw will rotate on an axis that is on the tabletop. This way I can have an almost zero clearance insert. I repeat everything in the other piece using the jig in the exact same position before making the other circles. Then I make the rest of the circles and measure carefully to check the correct width of the trunnions, which in this case is 50mm. In order to be able to tilt the saw, I decided to make a wooden gear. After designing it, I printed out the layout and aligned it with the pieces to cut. First, I cut the curved part with a router, and then I cut the teeth using the bandsaw. I finally smoothed every tooth with a small wood file. Now it's time to remove some material to make the trunnions, and for that I use the router and a chisel. The same thing is done for the fixed parts, trying to be the more accurate as possible so that both parts fit perfectly. The final pieces fit tightly as required,
so that they can move freely and at the same time don't have any kind of slack between them. Since the center of the trunnion circles sits outside the pieces, they have to be cut to size. The pieces have to be perfectly aligned so that the tilting is accurate and runs smoothly. And then they can be fixed in place with screws. It's time to check all the alignment and cut the excess in the corners so that it's able to tilt up to 45 degrees. For building the cabinet, I use 18mm Baltic birch plywood to give it strength enough to keep the table sturdy. All the pieces are cut to size using a circular saw. The structure of the cabinet is assembled using only screws so that I can disassemble it later on for finishing or to make some changes if necessary. The shelf that holds the saw is reinforced using two strips of 21mm Baltic birch plywood on the sides. I add some hardwood at the bottom to give the table more support and to hold the casters. Since the wood is a little bent, I put the bending part against the bottom of the cabinet to compensate for the weight of the cabinet itself. drill a bigger hole halfway through with a Forstner bit to accommodate the nut that will hold the casters in place. After fixing the hardwood with screws, I assembled the 4 casters. To insert the back and front boards holding the saw, I added some support in the middle of the cabinet so that the forces are not inward, making it easier to insert the boards. After testing if the saw fits correctly, I made a hole for the lifting system handle and made a corresponding arch with the router. The front and back boards are fixed to the pieces with the trunnions using wood screws. And then they are also reinforced with screws from the inside. After testing, I start making the drive gear using a paper template as a guide and cutting in the bandsaw. I mark the position of the gear using a drill bit the same size as the gear center hole. I use a piece of 10 mm threaded rod to hold the gear, and I make a groove in the end to make it easier to drill later on. Then I fix the gear to the rod using epoxy glue and 2 nuts. I cut a piece of brass pipe to be used as a bushing for the rod. In order to make a braking mechanism for the tilting system, I make an arch hole using the router. And mark the position for the handle with a drill bit. For the handles I use 18 mm birch plywood, cut in the bandsaw and sent to final shape in the disc sander. I made a hole in the handle to fit the threaded rod and drill a small hole and thread through both the handle and the rod to insert an M4 screw. Next, I cut a piece of dowel to make the knob for the handle. fix both pieces with a long screw, so that there's no thread on the part that should rotate freely. I attach both handles and test them, and they seem to work pretty fine, but I will make a bigger one for the tilting system so that it's easier to move. Finally, I drilled a hole for the braking mechanism and install a threaded insert. I added some more shelves to the sides to add strength and have more space to store the accessories.
I'm quite happy with the final result, but I think I can still make some improvements. Especially in the tilting system, where I can add an extra gear to make it easier to handle and so that I can make fine adjustments on the angle. Please let me know in the comments what you think about it, and I will be glad to hear all your suggestions. Stay tuned for the next parts, where I will show you how to make the tabletop, the fence, some nice accessories and sleds. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and remember, you can build it.